Larson and Hamlin have definitely solidified their place as the best new rivals of NASCAR, and looking at Toyotas and Chevys and how they're trading off wins back and forth, and looking at the Ford stats, there was a statement I made last week that I'm going to revoke. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, my name is Taylor Kitchen and welcome to Above the Yellow Line, where we do motorsports media your way, talking about NASCAR literally all the time. And I love talking about the Monster Mile Dover. It's one of my favorite tracks on the NASCAR schedule and I need to make it out there someday. Hopefully next year is the year, fingers crossed. But it produced some great racing. We'll get to that later on in the show. But it also put on display a great rivalry that we have in the Cup Series right now and that we've had brewing in this Gen 7 era between Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin. Hamlin started this race in the 6th position, and Kyle Larson had to work his way to the front of the field, which we all know for that 5 team is not a problem. He started this race in the 21st position, and before we knew it, the 11 and the 5 were contending for a win against each other. At the end of the day, as it always is, it comes down to a pit stop. That 11 team executed flawlessly to get out in front when it mattered, to get track position. And then on the final restart of the race, Denny Hamlin had a good launch. Kyle Larson really didn't. It got Hamlin the lead and eventually the win, capturing his 3rd win of 2024, really showing that this could be his year. I won't get into that conversation though, because I know you all are sick of it, but could be Denny Hamlin's year. Of course, that leads Kyle Larson to finish in that 2nd position, and later in the show when we talk about the race rating, why that happened, why he wasn't able to pass for the lead, we're going to talk about that, and that plays into my race rating and my perception of this event. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about air blocking and many more things in between. Interesting comments coming from Kyle Larson following the race that you'll want to stick around to hear. But in that 3rd position, let's talk about Martin Truex Jr. As always at Dover, that 19 car is a contender, and we know last year he won this race on a Monday. His brother Ryan Truex won this race as well in the Xfinity Series. He won the race this past weekend as well in the Xfinity Series, going back to back. So the hope was for the Truex brothers, they could have a sweep at Dover yet again. Unfortunately, that was not the case, with Martin Truex Jr. obviously finishing in that 3rd position. He did have a race-winning car. I really do think he did, and I'm going to say that about maybe 5 to 10 other teams during this video, but Truex did have speed until he did not. I think some damage to the nose and the splitter. The nose and the splitter of his car actually detached, and this came from damage due to a restart. He got into the back of Alex Bowman, and that kind of split that splitter and the nose of his car. That's a lot of words, sorry guys, but I mean, it split that part of his car, and of course that's going to cause some aerodynamic issues. So I think the race speed that he had to contend for a win was lost at that point. Surprisingly though, he was able to maintain his position inside the top 5. So what could have been a race win was lost, unfortunately, for that team, but you can't really complain about a top 3 day, considering just, I think the entire past 5 weeks for Toyota has been very interesting, especially Joe Gibbs Racing in particular. I mean, this is Martin's first top 10 since Martinsville, so I think you got to take it as a win. In the 4th position, leading the field to the green flag, was Kyle Busch. Looking back in the history books, remember the last driver to win this race from the pole was Jimmy Johnson back in 2010. Kyle Busch was hopeful that he could do the same. Unfortunately, that just did not pan out. I felt like in a 30 lap, maybe 40 lap run for Kyle Busch, maybe even less than that, he lost ground. He wasn't able to have really good long run speed. And then on top of issues on pit road, there was a caution earlier in the race for Todd Gilliland. It brought out the first caution of the day. Kyle Busch went to pit road. There was a lug nut issue. He lost 2 spots on pit road. And then during a stop later in the race, there was a mishap with the fuel situation for Kyle Busch and Daniel Hemrick. They had to go back down during the next caution to fill back up. Fortunately for both of those drivers, they finished with a top 10. Daniel Hemrick actually back-to-back top 10s from Talladega. Same thing with Noah Gragson, who finished in that 6th position. That's his 4th top 10 of the season, I believe. So really good days for the 31 team and the 10 team of Noah Gragson. Right in between Noah Gragson and Kyle Busch, we had Chase Elliott finishing in that 5th position. And going into this race weekend, looking at the stats on the ATYL live stream on Thursday nights at 7 p.m., shameless plug, I thought Chase Elliott had a chance to win. It's a really good track for him. He was my race-winning pick, and unfortunately, as practice and qualifying happened and the race was continuing, I knew he didn't have race-winning speed. At least he was consistent inside the top 5, even 7th to 5th in those positions. So finished where I think this car deserved, which is a positive. They'll take that momentum and move on to Kansas. Right after Chase Elliott, we have Ryan Blaney in 7th, 8th, Alex Bowman. And I said this before the season begun. I thought that Alex Bowman at least had a shot to win one race this season. And for me personally, I thought it was going to be this race. And at one point or another during this event, during the worth $400. I thought that was possible. Of course, looking at the results, we know he didn't win this race. But for you 48 fans out there, I don't think all hope is lost, because remember, he's really good at the Roval. He's really good at Charlotte. He's also pretty good at Kansas. The past 3 times we were at Kansas, he got top 10s. However, for Kansas, he's going to have to be better than the 2311 team and all the Toyotas, and I don't know if that's even possible. Just it's going to be the rest of the field versus the Toyotas for Kansas, like guaranteed 100%. So does Alex Bowman have a chance to win Kansas? I don't think so, all things considered, but there are really good tracks coming up for him on the schedule, so I would say not all hope is lost for you 48 fans. I do think Alex Bowman still has a shot to win a race this season. It might just come a little later than we think, or maybe he turns it around and wins the 600. Who knows? I mentioned earlier Daniel Hemrick with back-to-back top 10s, finishing in that 9th position and in 10th with his first top 10 since the Circuit of the Americas race, Ty Gibbs. There are a few drivers I want to talk about before we get to our race rating and before we get to some more key storylines from Dover. I want to talk about Corey Heim making his Cup Series debut in the number 43 for Legacy Motor Club, of course, filling in for Eric Jones, who suffered a compression fracture after a wreck at Talladega. Corey Heim did sign on to be the relief driver for Legacy Motor Club in 2311 when the season started, and this is an instance where he needs to be utilized, and he will be in that car for the foreseeable future. Jimmy Johnson did mention he might do some one-offs in the 43, maybe not, but if Jimmy doesn't, then it's going to be Corey Heim filling in until Eric Jones is able to return. It was really good to see Eric Jones. He was at the track sitting in the pit box for the 43, and he was interviewed by the Fox broadcast booth, so it was really good to hear from him. So hoping for him to have a speedy recovery and wishing him the best. All in all, though, 25th in your Cup Series debut, especially at a track that's as tricky as Dover, I don't think it's that bad. I mean, this car in general, Legacy Motor Club, tends to run typically in like the 20th, like 15th to 20th positions, maybe just outside of that. So that's not too far off. So props to Corey Heim in his debut. Again, Dover is a very tough track to make a debut at. Overall, really solid. Really happy for him. I feel like I mentioned AJ Allmendinger whenever he races in the Cup Series anymore, but he really is doing a nice job in this 16 car. I know he switches out between Josh Williams and SVG with a P13 finish for the day, doing a really good job. I wish he had more races this year in that 16 car in the Cup Series. I understand he doesn't, but I would love to see him a bit more. I really do miss him in the Cup Series. He was able to put in great results for Colleague Racing when he was full-time. Obviously, last year was a little bit of a miss, but seeing him putting in fantastic results during a part-time schedule for them is really awesome to see. So wanted to give him a shout out. Another driver I wanted to give a shout out because they were trading places all day long. He and AJ Allmendinger. We're talking about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Unfortunately for him, he did not finish this race. He was on the apron of the track trying to merge back in, and as he was doing that, he made contact with Josh Berry, and that ended his day. So very unfortunate for Ricky. I know he got some stage points as well. So it was really good to see that 47 team run consistently throughout the race and have really good pace. Other drivers that did not finish this race, there are 3 I want to mention in particular because there was an incident that just knocked them all out of contention. We have Christopher Bell with his 3rd DNF of the season. He has 5 finishes outside the top 30 this season, which is not what I would expect at all for that 20 team at all. William Byron did not finish this race. It's his first DNF of the season. He was put towards the back of the pack after a mistake on pit road. He was not able to make up track position from there on out. He was not good in the dirty air at all and was just around this for the entire mess and chaos. And then Bubba Wallace also did not finish this race, finished in the 32nd position. This all happened after Zane Smith made contact with Bubba Wallace. It sent him around to avoid it. Bell got hit as well, and then everyone just kind of collided into William Byron, and it ended all of their days. Very unfortunate because I thought Byron could have won this race if it wasn't for that mistake on pit road, and then of course this just killed any chance he had of making up ground. Bubba Wallace had raced his way inside the top 10, not a contender to win, but at least could have been a really good day for that team. They've had a rough few weeks. There were 6 DNFs total in this race, and 2 of those were Ford drivers. I said at the beginning of the show that I would revoke a statement I made about the Fords. Remember, last week during the episode of Above the Yellow Line talking about Talladega, I said, let's give Ford a break. This is a super speedway race. If Ford doesn't do well, it's all just luck, chance, chaos, etc. So I'm not going to judge Ford's performance based off of a super speedway race. What we saw today at Dover made me revoke my statement of let's give the Fords 3 more races before I hit the panic button. The panic button getting hit. I don't like what I saw today from any of their cars besides Ryan Blaney. And yes, to be fair, we did have Fords finish inside the top 10, Noah Gragson, of course, Ryan Blaney. Then we had others finish inside the top 15. But remember, there were 6 cars that did not finish this race. Because they didn't finish this race, some of the field that was racing outside the top 15 automatically gets pushed forward in the positions, and we have what we have. But on top of that too, I mean, Chase Briscoe was racing really well inside the top 10. Noah Gragson was racing really well inside the top 10 until they just started to fade during the race. Of course, Noah Gragson again got that back, but still, all things considered, Fords don't have the speed this year. They are at an aerodynamic advantage. If I could tell you what the disadvantage is and exactly why it is, I would tell you, but I don't think we're privy to that information. If there's anything the Ford teams can try, now is the time to do it. Of course, trying within the legal bounds of the NASCAR rules, because it's not looking pretty for that manufacturer right now in their performance. Again, I would expect that Ryan Blaney performs really well as he's the reigning champion, and he has. That's awesome to see. But there's no consistency, and when you think there's consistency, it's not there. And though I am being very harsh on this OEM for their performance and their lack of speed right now, I do want to be clear though, I do see that there are some drivers and some teams that are taking positive steps forward. For instance, Josh Berry, he was solidly racing inside the top 15 this entire race. He was really holding his own. Dover is a great track for him. He has 3 top 3 finishes in the Xfinity Series, 1 win at that track in the Xfinity Series. So this track does treat him well, and I was hoping it would translate over to the Cup Series, and I think so far it has. A Ford driver we haven't talked about this race was Chase Briscoe. He was solidly inside the top 10 to start things before he faded. And though Brad Keselowski didn't have a good time at Dover, he is coming off of second place finishes from Talladega and Texas, but this just wasn't the weekend for him. So I recognize that there are Ford drivers and Ford teams that are doing decently well, but they can only do so well with the speed, with the aerodynamic disadvantage that they're having right now. So again, Ford needs to do something. I don't know what it is, but something to make their performance better, because right now the panic button has been hit. I'm concerned. I don't know when they're going to get their first win. I say the 600 is maybe their best chance, but then looking past that, I think Michigan in August is the next time that we could probably see a Ford win if they don't pick up the pace. There's concern there, and yeah, I revoke my statement from last week. The panic button is hit now. All right, rant over about the Ford performance. Let's go into our race rating. First things first. It was so refreshing to see the stands, the fan zone packed for this event. Davey Seagull made a really good point that this is like the first time in 5 years where this race was not impacted by weather, COVID, or COVID restrictions. So everyone showed up for this race, and it was fantastic. I also recognize that there is a lot of positivity in dwindling tracks down to 1 race a year. It makes them a little bit more scarce. It makes people really want to attend that one event of the season for the Cup Series, and they showed up, which is awesome. I thought this race was very entertaining, especially that battle between Larson and Hamlin for the lead coming to the checkered flag. And this is where we get into our conversation of, okay, how was Hamlin able to maintain the lead? Why was Larson not able to pass? And that all comes down to air blocking. And I know a lot of people are very frustrated with the Gen 7 car and how it has a really easy ability to do that. Trust me, I think I am too. A little bit, maybe not as much as everyone else, but it frustrates me just as much. But it's really nothing new. It's just the Gen 7 car makes this a more profound issue. Kyle Larson spoke to the media after the race and said Denny Hamlin won this race not only by a really good restart, but by air blocking. He also shared that issues like this are magnified on a track with less grip. He also said that it's a lot harder when you're in the top 5, especially passing a guy for the lead, because the pace is just a lot quicker. And when you're in the lead, you can go wherever you want on the track, and that issue is not helped by the rear view cameras that these Gen 7 cars have. Larson actually suggested to the media following the race that these cameras be removed and we just kind of go back to mirrors. These cameras make it a lot easier to see the guy behind you and know where to block. He also admitted during this interview that that's what he really did to win the race against Tyler Reddick back at Las Vegas. So a little hypocritical to use the rear view camera to win a race and then say they should be taken away because that's how Hamlin won his race. It's whatever. I'm not going to judge, but I'm also going to judge just a little bit. But as much as we blame the air blocking of these Gen 7 cars, we also have to blame the tools that the drivers use to make air blocking much easier than it would be with tools that we didn't have before. Shout out to Peter Strada for getting that interview after the race and posting it to his Twitter profile. I'll have that linked in the description below. Really interesting point that I think was not talked about on the broadcast at all. That was kind of a tidbit that came after the race. That's why I like to wait a little bit to record ATYL to get some extra feedback from the drivers following the race to give it to you all. So something I thought was very interesting, but I don't think any of the air blocking whatever really hindered my perception of the race as much as I would have liked to. Sure, I would have loved to have seen a side-by-side battle to the end, but we've also seen that side-to-side battle at the end of a race in other races this season. So it's Dover's loss not having a side-by-side battle for the win. However, we have seen it at multiple other events this season, so I'm not going to get butthurt about it. It's totally fine. I also think this race was a great example of the Gen 7 car now being utilized as a defensive tool versus an offensive tool. The drivers made some really good points about that going into this weekend, saying it's now more important than ever to execute on pit road, execute restarts because it's much harder to pass. And then once you have that position, you're doing everything you can to block the guys behind you. Again, the air blocking, it all comes full circle. It really does. I also felt the tire fall off was perfect for this race. And what was really entertaining to me was seeing how these teams would be challenged with the conditions of practice and qualifying, with it being cold and overcast, to race day where it was 85 and sunny. Seeing them keep up with those changes and try to set up their cars for race day versus practice and qualifying, that was fun too for me to keep up with during this race. So overall, I thought Dover produced exciting battles, exciting strategy. I thought it was overall really solid. I'm going to give it a 78%. That feels wrong. 78% though, above the yellow line for sure. This is another race I might go back to later in the season and say I might rank it higher, but I thought it was overall pretty solid. I really liked what I saw. As I'm recording this feels like it's going to be a longer episode than typical, so thanks for bearing with me on this episode of Above the Yellow Line. So glad you could join me, and of course, to keep up to date on the latest from myself and all of the ATYL crew, make sure to follow us on social media and check out AboveTheYellowLine.com. And for more NASCAR news during the week, make sure to check out TobyChristie.com to hear from us, the drivers, the teams, and so much more. If you'd like to chat with me and the rest of the Above the Yellow Line crew, we have a live stream coming up again this Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so you'll want to make sure you join in on the conversation. We will recap the rest of Dover and we'll preview Kansas, and also we might have a special guest, so stay tuned for that. But thank you all so much for watching this episode of Above the Yellow Line. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with your friends and family. And until next time, I'll see ya. Bye.